the Days of Miracles. I think welcome back to most of you, all familiar faces and names. So today we are on the fourth day of miracles, and we have Venerable Drolma again telling us about the 8 verses of mind transformation. So I think no much words needed, and I give straight away to Venerable Drolma. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I hope you had a great day. It's weekend. Hope you're enjoying your weekend. Let's get started with some meditation. As usual, I like to bring the mind into the space that we're creating to do this learning. So getting into a comfortable posture, relaxing those shoulders, letting some of the ordinary world be released, letting go, starting to turn inward. Take some deep breaths to center even a little bit more. And then we can take a moment to consider this amazing opportunity that we have, that we can hear the Dharma, think about the Dharma without even leaving our own homes. That we're interested, that we've actually tuned in, that we have the resources, this computer, the internet. It's an incredible opportunity that hasn't always been available in the world, but is available to us now. With this understanding of cause and effect, we contributed to the causes that allowed this to happen. We made prayers, we wished for this opportunity. Even if we don't remember having done it, we did. And so we wouldn't want to waste it. We wouldn't want to just throw it away after all the work we put into getting it. The purpose of our work, the purpose of being here today is to release ourselves from the suffering, from the difficulties in our lives, and forever, right? For future lives as well. And then we can think about how all the beings that we care for already are in the same situation as us. They don't necessarily have a clue, a way to get free. They don't have the same causes that we have to be interested in the Dharma, to have access, to have time to practice. And so we bring ourselves and our others this incredible opportunity by the work that we do today, by the thinking that we're doing today, the contemplation, the learning that we're doing today. So this becomes our motivation. And then at the end, we'll dedicate. So is that better now, Kumpenla? Okay, good. I had the heater on. It's not particularly cold here, but sometimes I notice. Okay, so let's start with some review. So we're talking about this text, the 8 verses of thought transformation, or sometimes it's translated mind training or thought training, or, it's got lots of different, it's basically the term lojong in Tibetan. And the text was written by Langri Tangpa, who was a Kadampa master, one of the early disciples of Lama Atisha, who brought the second wave of Buddhism to Tibet. And it's the Kadampa masters were the founders of the new schools, the Kagyu, Gelug, and Sakya schools of Tibetan Buddhism. The practice of lojong is very interesting. It's considered a little bit more advanced than the regular sutra. It's still in the sutra category, but it's a little bit more advanced because it asks us to consider our difficulties as opportunities. Like Lama Zopa says, problems are like ice cream. We want ice cream. We want problems because we use problems to transform our minds. So there you have the text. The other aspect of lojong is that it asks us to really challenge, I think in common knowledge, in common language, and it would be called the ego. And I don't really like that term because we want in Western psychology, regular psychology, we want to have a strong ego because that helps us have self-confidence. But when we're talking about ego in the negative sense, we're talking more about this sense of self-centeredness, this sense that I am separate from everyone else and I am more important than everyone else. And within the lojong teachings, this is very grounded in our habit of how we even perceive who we are, our sense of self, that I, that we grasp at it as existing in a certain way that it doesn't. And because we see it that way, because we see that grasping, because we see that I in that way as somehow more elaborate than it actually is, more concrete, more separate, more, stronger. Stronger isn't such a good word. It's like we walk around and we see things exist, there's a table there and there's another person there and there's there's food there and there's, and I have thoughts. And when we're sort of calm and relaxed and not really triggered too much, everything kind of has the same sort of, everything just exists. It just is. But what happens is when we feel attacked or we feel like really wanting something, you know, our desire gets really strong. Then when we, you know, get very lustful or we get really angry, then that sense of I becomes stronger. It becomes like even more elaborated. And then we get really focused on that self. We get really self-centered. And this becomes, even at very subtle levels, this becomes a problem because it creates a lot of, we end up hurting others. We end up not being very wise. We end up very fearful and very closed down, very tight. And so these teachings ask us to take the results of that tightness, the results of that, those afflictions, that anger, which are always negative, and say, okay, that suffering is caused by this view of myself, my self-centeredness. And so it takes that suffering and pushes it onto that self-centeredness and says, you hurt me, you make problems for me, and so I want you to go away. And so it becomes we use that suffering as a motivation in lots of different ways, different reasonings, different techniques, to start to get rid of that. And so then what is the opposite of that? What is the opposite of that tightness, that self-centeredness? It's an openness, it's a relaxation, and it's also an understanding of our connections, our inner connections to the world and to all other beings. And then that inner connection, that really, it opens us up, it connects us to others, and then it makes room for things like loving kindness, compassion, which are the basis of our ultimate motivation, our Mahayana motivation, which is bodhicitta, right? Loving others, loving every other, not just a few others, but all beings, and making our whole existence, our whole life, every action, every moment about developing that ourselves so that we can be of greatest benefit to others. So it's interesting. It's got, I mean, bodhicitta is very interesting because it has this sense of, I want to get enlightened, right? But at the same time, I am connected to all others, which sort of subsumes that I, you know, sort of decreases that I into something. So it's really this nice balance, because we don't want the I so big that it's like we're full of ourselves, we're narcissistic, we're so engaged with only ourselves. And at the same time, we can't completely lose ourselves in that sense of other, because then we are ineffectual. We hurt ourselves, we disappear, we can't actually get to enlightenment because we lose ourselves. So it's bringing this balance, and this balance is what more closer to this conventional I, the I that actually exists, this merely labeled I. And that's what we want to start to operate from, is this merely labeled I. So the merely labeled I, the conventionally existent I, is very hard to get to. It's hard to experience because we have this huge habit of seeing that sense of self as bigger, more concrete, more elaborated than it actually is. And we've always had that. We've had that for gazillions, countless lifetimes. We've been believing that this I exists in this way that it doesn't. So we have to use some powerful techniques to start to crush that, to start to say, no, that isn't what actually happens, how things actually are. And so then getting to that sense of a conventional I can be very difficult. The other aspect that's hard about this conventional I, which is the I that exists, the I that we want to encourage, the I that we want to start to come from, operate from, is that it's very, very subtle, meaning we have to get to it through reasoning. the opposite, a coarse sense of I is pretty easy to see, right? When I get angry and you're attacking me, this is much easier to explore. And that's the I that doesn't really exist, is not helpful to us, creates all the problems for us. So we getting to this more subtle I, this sense that of who we actually are, is more difficult because it takes practice, it takes reasoning, and it takes sort of pushing that other I away to say it isn't helpful. It's creating problems for me. And the reason why that's hard is because we're so used to that coarse, elaborated, inherently existent I. We're so used to it that if we imagine getting rid of it, we get really afraid. We get really defensive because it's familiar, right? Coming to a sense of a conventional I is pushing our comfort zones, pushing that ego that we're so used to operating from, that we depend on, that we believe is so important to us. When we push it, we pull back immediately, right? We say, oh, that's ridiculous, right? Oh, I can't do that. Oh, it's too far, right? It's an extreme, and I don't want to go to extremes. And this text, this 8 verses, pushes us to go to extremes. It does. It says, actually, extremes are the only way that you're going to get to that subtle sense of I, that sense of how we actually exist. Because this text asks us to be strong in challenging that I, and to be strong in expanding our comfort zone to include all beings, to bring all beings into, because all beings are suffering. There, if we can take our own suffering, and we know when we imagine or remember how painful our suffering has been, when we remember that, imagine multiplying that infinitely. I mean, it just, it breaks me up just thinking of it. We can, like Geshe Namdok talks about the constantly weeping bodhisattva. I can imagine, right? When you think about that huge amount of suffering. And so, of course, to imagine that huge amount of suffering and to think that we could actually even touch it, even, wipe a little bit of it away is hard to imagine. And it pushes us. And that's why this text is so powerful, but also very difficult at the same time. So I try to soften it a little bit by bringing out I start with some of the verses that are a little bit easier to take, a little bit easier for us to approach. So let's go over the verses that we went over yesterday. Give me a second. Oh, I didn't even open it. Hold on just a second. It'll take me. Okay. So, vigilant, the moment a delusion appears in my mind, endangering myself and others, I shall confront and avert it without delay. So this talks about our mindfulness, and all of us as Buddhists, one of the first things, I assume it's probably true for most of you, one of the first things we start doing is this mindfulness, right? Meditation. We start focusing on our breath. We're interested in Buddhism because meditation, we've heard, can help us with our problems. It can decrease our stress. So, and also, what is this focusing on? This is focusing on myself, right? Right? The moment a delusion appears in my mind, right? Endangering myself and others. So we're asked here to start to become aware, to come into the present moment, to learn to be present with our own emotions, and recognize what motivates our actions. This also starts to help us expand, like I talked about, that abstract concept of being able to see how someone else's point of view, to see that the person in front of me who is harming me is coming from their own delusions, that is coming from their own suffering, that they are actually suffering, and that's why they are hurting me. And if I want that to stop that hurting, I have to work with the afflictions, not with the person. The person is okay. The afflictions are the problem, starting to separate that. And when we become aware of our own afflictions, it's easier for us to start to see how others are motivated by their afflictions, how others do things that hurt them, right? And then, of course, in order to prevent ourselves from creating more negativity in our lives, we stop that affliction. We don't want to create the causes to continue to suffer in our own life. And eventually we want to remove even the root cause. Okay, so vigilance becomes very important. And we looked briefly at this great quote from Mingyur Rinpoche: feeling divided from ourselves and the world around us is the deceptive narrative of the grasping mind. But we can learn to let go of false hopes that leave us yearning for ease in our bodies and in this world. That yearning for ease, that's that comfort. We can move beyond our discontent. We set it aside. We can replace longing with love. As I was just beginning to discover, when you love the world loves you back. So this is the essential meaning of the Lojong teachings, is that that self-centeredness is the source of all of our problems. And even though it's hard, even though it's challenging for us, even though we resist it, what we start to see is the more that we decrease that ego that we have relied on for so long, the more we'll start to see how comfortable that is, how actually that creates so much more bliss for us, so much more love in the world, connection, harmony, and it comes right back to us. It's actually the better way to, to pursue our goals than doing it for this self-centeredness. But it's countercultural. We talked a little bit about that. It's countercultural to think that if I open myself to others, it will actually make me more happy. We have a tendency and a belief that we need to close ourselves, that we need to protect me, to get for me. And that's the way that I'll be happy. Okay. And then we skip to the last verse: undefiled by the stains of the superstitions of the 8 worldly concerns, may I, by perceiving all phenomena as illusory, be released from the bondage of attachment. So the 8 worldly concerns are our usual motivations, our usual way of interacting in the world. And these 8 worldly concerns create a lot of fear. Fear of not being comfortable, fear of not, of not having enough, fear of what other people think, fear of being, criticized. And these fears stop us. They stop us in so many ways. They stop us from developing love. They stop us from connecting with others. They create loneliness. They create, they cause us to hurt. Oftentimes when we fear is underneath anger. And as a result of anger, we end up hurting each other, other people. How many times have we thought about how fear is so much the basis of war, or fear is the basis of, like building walls, for, border walls, like, my absurd country tried to do for a while there. As if you could build a wall between two countries. It's absurd, especially nowadays in this global, world that we have. We can start to see how interconnected we are, that building a wall it's an illusion, isn't it? It's making it up. People are always going to find a way through or around. It's absurd. But these 8 worldly concerns motivate us to build walls, and the walls they just make problems for us. They don't help us. They create more resistance. They create fear. They create anxiety. So undefiled by the stains of the superstition. So we're trying to set aside building those walls. And we do that by starting to see the emptiness, the phenomena as illusory. So the emptiness of this self, this ego that is somehow separate from all things, and release us from this bondage of attachment. Okay, so let's pause here for a second. Just a little bit more about how we go about releasing ourselves from that sense of I that doesn't exist. So this is a meditation that you can do, and it's really helpful just to do a quick book referral, and it's a short one. It's His Holiness the Dalai Lama's How to See Yourself as You Really Are. It's an amazing book that helps us to identify that elaborated self, that coarse self that gets in the way. So that sense of self comes up when we have a lot of fear, when we have a lot of anger, when we have a lot of strong emotion. And it's important when we have that strong emotion to set aside the emotion and try to see how we are experiencing that I, that me, as separate from others, as somehow something that can be harmed. So powerful. It's whenever, if strong emotion is present, often a strong sense of I is also present. And then what we do is we try to find that sense of self. We try to find that I in the body and mind. So when you start looking for it, first you look for it in your body, but it's very difficult to find, because when you look at your body, what you find are muscles and bones and organs and blood and all that stuff. You don't really find that I, that sense of a strong I. So then of course we think, oh, it's not in my body. That's a pretty easy one, right? So then we think, okay, it's in my mind. And then you start looking at your mind, and your mind is basically thoughts, isn't it? It's this, it's very, it's barely there, for one thing, the mind. You can't see it, you can't touch it, it doesn't have shape, doesn't have color. And you have lots and lots of thoughts, right? I mean, there are many, many thoughts, and some of them are kind of absurd, like ridiculous. You can imagine, pink elephants and things like that, and they don't exist. So where is that self? Is that self just a thought? And if it's just a thought, why does it feel so strong? So that's part of what we can do, is start to look at, okay, where is that sense of me that I think is so powerful and so essential and so much, has to be the center of the universe, has to be protected, right? Where does it exist? Okay. Then the other way we can look at it is we can look at how the self is so much a part already of all things, right? In order for me to be here right now, I am dependent on all the kindnesses that all the beings have ever given to me, right? How can I separate out a self that is somehow different from all the, the carrots and potatoes and, all the food I have eaten in this life? And where did all that food come from? It came from other beings who grew it, beings who brought it to the stores, beings who prepared it, all the beings that went into the soil that allowed the plant to grow, all the water, right? And then I wouldn't be here without the shelter that I live in right now, or even before, right? All the clothes that kept me warm, all the medicines that kept me alive. And then we can think, okay, that's just my body. So then my mind, where is a separate self from all the things I've ever learned? All the person who taught me to read, if that person wasn't there, I wouldn't be here. How can I say I am separate from that person? How is that possible? Or all the opinions I've ever listened to, in television shows and conversations and, magazines and everything. How can I say there's a me, somehow that is separate from all those influences that have ever come to me? So then that self starts to disappear. It starts to be like, oh, actually, I am connected to all these things. Okay. But it doesn't disappear completely, but it gets very, very subtle. It becomes, oh, in this moment, I take all these things. I take this mind with all these thoughts. I take this body and I say, oh, that's Drolma. Okay. That's the label on this momentary coming together of all these causes and conditions. And that's why it's so subtle, because it's barely there. That's that conventional self. Okay. So when we start to experience ourselves in that way, as here, but barely here, as so much more interdependent and connected than we usually think of, that releases us from this bondage of attachment. Because why would I need this external thing if I'm already connected to it? If I'm already the whole world, right? If in my base, who I really am is this interdependent coming together in this moment of all these things, that separateness kind of starts to disappear. It starts to melt, right? I mean, in this moment, I'm this very subtle sort of identified piece of this whole, but in fact, my basis is much more connected. And that's where we can get this, when you love the world loves you back, right? You're a part of that. All right. Okay, I didn't go into that much yesterday, so I wanted to do that today. So then we went to verse number 2. When in the company of others, I shall always consider myself the lowest of all, and from the depths of my heart hold others supreme. I didn't miss one, did I? Yeah, okay. So this is the beginning of what I was talking about before, where we start to challenge that ego, where we go into a situation and we say, okay, my tendency is to think that I am the most important, I am the best, because that's what I'm familiar with. That's what I know. But if I start practicing seeing myself as not as good as others, right? Then I can start to challenge that ego. I can start to challenge that sense of self-centeredness. I can start to challenge that self-grasping that believes that it is separate from others. And then this holding others dear and supreme is about developing love, loving kindness, which is the basis of enlightenment, right? The basis of becoming happy for all beings, right? I become happy, you become happy. So this becomes our path, our lojong, our training, considering myself the lowest of all. Okay. And then the last one we talked about yesterday, determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, I shall hold them most dear at all times. So obtaining the greatest possible benefit is this recognition that because I am an interdependent being, because I am connected to all beings, if I want to be happy, if I want to attain enlightenment to benefit them, then I have to use them, right? I have to recognize that all these beings are the way I am going to get to enlightenment, the way I am going to get to this ultimate happiness for myself and others. So His Holiness talks about how bodhisattvas who have bodhicitta are selfishly wise, meaning that the selfishness is that because we haven't gotten rid of this ego yet, because we haven't gotten rid of this self-centeredness yet, we have to kind of use that to motivate us, to help us. So we can recognize that actually, if I want to be happy, the best way for me to do it is to love others. And that's the wisdom part. The best way for me to be happy is to develop this sense of interconnectedness with all others. That is the basis of love and the basis of happiness. So they become the way that I am going to, get to enlightenment, the way that I'm going to pursue my happiness. There were these, it was while I was at, I don't know how long they've been around, maybe 10 years or so. There are these cute little plastic boxes that have one end of them open that I think ABC in Singapore had made and distributed to all the FPMT centers. And they're for scooping up insects and taking them outside. And one of the things, and Lama Zopa is so precious when he talks about, bringing mantras to everybody. And so there are the mantras all over these boxes. So when the little ants walk in the box or when the spiders walk in the box, they get blessed with the mantras inside the box. And one of the sayings that you can read while you're scooping up your insect is about how they are the source of all my happiness. They are they are precious because they are the way I'm going to get to enlightenment. And it just reminds us how precious every single being is. And if an ant is that precious, and you have, millions of ants running around, and usually we're irritated by them, then think about all the human beings, right? And how precious they are and how amazing they are. And so then this holding them most dear at all times. So we're starting to do this equalizing and exchanging self and others. So this is a technique that comes from Shantideva. And we'll start in with the next verse. But let's talk a little bit about this. This technique of Shantideva, which is in the Way of the Bodhisattva book, called Equalizing and Exchanging Self and Others, is a very accessible way to develop bodhicitta. And it talks first about this understanding that we are equal to all beings. And we've done this just now with this sense of a conventional self, how I wouldn't exist without my interdependent nature, my connection to all beings. And then another way we can do this is that we can examine the motivations of all beings. We can start to see that all beings want to be happy, and this is the meditation that we did yesterday, and they don't want to suffer in exactly the same way that we do. They're the only reason that our happiness appears to be more important to us and that our suffering appears to hurt more us is because of our limited point of view. if we were able to get into the minds of others, we would see that their happiness is just as important to them and their suffering hurts just as much. So they aren't any different than us. So that's starting to equalize, seeing that we aren't more important than others, and it's only familiarity. And with this abstract thinking, with our minds, we can start to equalize that all beings are just as important. And then the exchanging comes when we start to consider that all beings are more important than me because there are so many of them. Because infinite numbers of sentient beings, again, that's a lot of suffering. And that amount of suffering is so much bigger than my own. When you put them all together, they're so much more important than just this one little, bit of suffering. And then, I mean, what comes to mind, I don't know if it's in the teachings for me, is that I have this incredible opportunity and they don't necessarily have that, right? They don't have the same, they haven't created the same causes and they don't have the same conditions that I do to become enlightened. So how could I possibly put my petty, desires before them? I mean, I do constantly, but I wish I didn't, right? I'm seeing like now when we start to consider this reasoning, it's like, how could I even imagine, right, that I would be more important than all those beings? And then what do I do with that, right? Well, then each day, even if I can't go out, and run and remove world hunger from the world, you know what? I can give up my $50 to the World Food Program, or I can make, meditate a little bit more instead of, reading my trashy novels or whatever. I can start to shift the balance in my life to putting others more important than me. Okay, so let's look at verse number 4. So I'm at to 4. Okay. So this is it becomes even more challenging to that ego. Whenever I see beings who are wicked in nature and overwhelmed by violent negative actions and suffering, I shall hold such rare ones dear as if I had found a precious treasure. Now, what do we usually do when we have really annoying people or people who we see are really creating a lot of suffering in the world, that we see that they are overwhelmed by their own power hungriness or their own self-centeredness or their own ignorance, believing that what they are doing is right, and yet they're harming so many people. I mean, right now, this is pretty odd, but it's always obvious. I think if you pay attention to the news is constantly filled with violent negative actions and suffering. And how we usually do it is that we blame those people and we reject those people and we say they're horrible people and we develop hatred, for these people, because what we're seeing is that they are intending, so they have a concrete, absolutely existent self that is intending harm to others for their own, self-centeredness, and we blame the person. So what this verse is asking us to do is to turn that around and say, they are so precious. They are so wonderful for me. Because why? Why are they precious? Why would they be a precious treasure for me? Because they help me to get enlightened. And how do they help me to get enlightened? Because I have to work my loving kindness muscles. I have to work my compassion muscles in order to bring them into the fold, right? Bring them into my bodhicitta motivation. I have to really work to see, first of all, that they don't exist in the way that I am perceiving them. There is no absolutely existent bad self in them. They are the product of all their causes and conditions. Secondly, I have to see that they are creating in the, the very subtle sense that is there, is creating problems for themselves. They're creating so much negativity for themselves, so much more suffering for themselves. And so then I can develop compassion for them. And my compassion muscles can grow. So it's very easy to love my adorable younger sister, who is an incredible, kind person who has dedicated her life to educating children who don't get a good education in this country. I mean, she has spent years, she's built companies, 2 different companies that are about schools that, benefit underprivileged children. She's easy to love, she's happy, she's kind, she's sweet, all these things. And so I don't have any problem having love. And when she goes through a hard time, I don't have any problem having compassion for her. But this other person who I see is creating so much harm and negativity, then I have to work. Then I have to really try to develop compassion, try to see who they are. And we have lots of techniques for doing this, seeing them as little children, seeing them as, a young boy or girl. When they were little children, they were definitely lovable, right? All these techniques that we can use to start to turn it around, to see them as precious, as important, as our way to get to enlightenment. Okay. When out of envy, others mistreat me with abuse, insults, or the like, I shall accept defeat and offer the victory to others. So this is a little bit obvious again. Obvious in the sense of how it is challenging that ego, challenging that self-centeredness, challenging that self-grasping that thinks that it's better than others. We can recognize, we can remember when we have felt jealous of others, when we have mistreated others with abuse and insults, and we can recognize that that came from that affliction. Jealousy comes from attachment to something, right? Attachment, elaborating the positives in something and wanting it, and then being angry that we don't have it. So someone who mistreats us with abuse and jealousy, we can start to remember how we have had that affliction and how it made us miserable. And then we can develop compassion for them, and it becomes easier to offer the victory to others. Now, here, what also stops us, I think, from doing this is, again, this fear of compassion. Tupten Jinpa, an amazing translator and former monk, and he's now head of an institution that does compassion training. He talks about how, to remember what I was saying, how we are afraid of compassion because we think we'll be used. And this verse really brings it out. Like, well, if I let people insult me or I let them abuse me and I accept that defeat, then they're going to continue to do that. They're going to continue to abuse me. Sounds really valid, doesn't even sounds valid to me, like, oh yeah, That's really true. However, we rarely even try this. That was my first thought was, well, how often do I actually try to challenge that self-centeredness in myself by offering the victory to others? I don't usually, right? I usually get angry automatically. So I think trying this would be a really good idea. Okay. And then what Thupten Jinpa says about letting, others, not ever setting boundaries, is that isn't necessarily compassionate either. When you never stop someone from hurting you or abusing you or insulting you, then that lets them think that it's okay to harm others, and that we would want to stop. So I see both of these, right, happening within this verse. This, like, I'm gonna give the victory to others so that I don't think that so that I don't puff myself up in order to hurt them back, right? Because that's our tendency, is to then abuse them back or insult them back or withdraw or reject or, harm or hurt or hate in some way. But at the same time, when I'm coming from that more conventional self, I can set boundaries in a very compassionate, loving, connected way. But first, if I offer the victory to others, I'm less likely to harm when I respond. Okay, so that's what I see, both of these going on within this verse. Okay. Verse number 6, when someone whom I have benefited and in whom I have great hopes gives me terrible harm, I shall regard that person as my holy guru. So once again, that person, my holy guru, is someone who teaches me. They teach me about my afflictions. So I open my heart to someone, I benefit someone, I want, I want them to be happy. I help them a lot, and then they turn around and they betray me. What's really happening there? Okay. What's really happening is I am experiencing the karma that I've created in the past that harmed others, that betrayed others, that acted in this same way. So now, how do I use that? Do I then blame them and reject them and hurt them? Or do I recognize, oh, I must have done this? And I think, wow, I need to purify. I need to be extra special careful about my actions from now on, because obviously I have the seed to have done this same thing in my mind stream. I have done it in the past, or else I wouldn't be experiencing it now. And so that person is showing me, they are teaching me how I need to be extra careful, to be very, very aware that I not do this again. And this is how, my teacher, right? My teacher helps me to stop my afflictions. My holy guru helps me to learn to challenge that self-grasping so that I can be a better person, so that I can progress on my path, so that I can develop bodhicitta, so that I can achieve ultimate happiness. My holy guru is the source of all of my happiness. If I didn't have my teachers, I wouldn't progress. I would just stay stupid, right? Stay in my habits. Okay. So starting to see that person as my precious teacher, my holy guru, who is showing me, not only are they showing me how I need to, behave, but they are giving me this incredible opportunity to purify my negative karma. When I experience it with that person, so that person betrays me, that person harms me, I am really hurt. If I take it as a lesson if I take it as an understanding that it's a purification, and I don't retaliate, I don't do that action again, I become very careful in my interactions in the future, then that karma stops. That seed ends. I experience the results, it's done. And I never have to suffer in that way again. So this is how they become my holy guru. Okay, so then this verse 7, we're done. We're done with all the challenges to that ego, right? All these, practices that we've been doing that sort of push our comfort zone. And now they're saying, okay, when you're not being challenged, how can you develop this loving kindness and compassion in your own mind? So then verse number 7, in short, both directly and indirectly, do I offer every happiness and benefit to all my mothers. I shall secretly take upon myself all their harmful actions and suffering. So this is Tonglen. And hold on a second. Time. Okay. So directly, in short, both directly and indirectly, do I offer every happiness and benefit to all my mothers. I shall secretly take upon myself all their harmful actions and suffering. So directly is whatever we can do. Whatever, like for me right now, it's taking care of my mom. So taking her out for a walk, cooking dinner, all these things. Directly, I can offer happiness and benefit. And indirectly, I do my practice, right? I try to become enlightened as quickly as possible so that I can free all sentient beings. I do my practice, my meditation and my study so that all of my interactions with all my mothers are kind and compassionate. So this benefit to all my mothers comes from the second technique of developing bodhicitta, the 7-point cause and effect. And in that 7-point cause and effect, we consider the fact that because we have been beginningless lifetimes, because we have had beginningless lifetimes, in all those lifetimes, we have had mothers. In order to become a turtle, right, there had to have been a mother who laid an egg. In order to be a human, I had to, a mother had to give me a body, right? So if we consider gazillions and gazillions of past lifetimes, every single sentient being has had the opportunity or has been actually my mother. So that's why we say happiness and benefit to all my mothers, because every being has been my mother. They've also been my mom, my father. They've been my brother. They've been my sister. They've been my enemy. They've been my friend, all these things. But when we focus on mothers, mothers traditionally, maybe true for you or not, are the ones we feel closest to in our lives, our mothers. So if we were to raise up all beings and see them as our mothers, then automatically we would start to feel love for them and feel compassion for them and feel this sense of responsibility that I need to free them from their suffering as quickly as possible. And then secretly means we don't want to puff ourselves up again. We're trying to get away from that a bit. Secretly taking upon myself all their harmful actions and suffering. So this practice of Tonglen, so Tonglen means giving and taking. So the Tong is actually we do it opposite. Oh, I can't remember. So first we take, then we give. The len is the taking, the tong is the giving. I hope I had that right. Okay. So tong len is about, again, it's a technique to challenge this self-centeredness, this self-grasping. And how we do it is we imagine we get in touch with our mothers, and it can be any of our mothers. It can be our mother of this life. It can be a mother of any other life, right? And we imagine them in front of us. We connect with them, right? And we take their point of view, practice doing that. And we get in touch first with how they are suffering. And even if they don't have immediate, like obvious suffering, we know that they're stuck in samsara, because even if they're not suffering right now, they're going to suffer in the future in probably a very short amount of time. And they're already suffering from aging, sickness, they're going to die. I mean, it's already a part of any being that we know is in samsara. And so we can imagine their suffering, and we become willing to take on their suffering. We develop compassion. We recognize, first of all, how having empathy for them, how much they are suffering, and we want their suffering to be removed. What this process does, which is really nice, when we connect with others through compassion, we stop this tendency that we have to other this. I just recently read this amazing book about edge states of compassion. I'll get you the name in a minute. But anyway, she talks about how compassion is an edge state, in the sense that we can go over the edge of our compassion by feeling, when we feel overwhelmed by compassion. Now, what happens when we feel overwhelmed by the suffering in others, when we end up pushing it away, and we do this, what is called othering. We make the suffering in the person other than us. We create this wall, this othering. And she talks about bringing that suffering closer. And sometimes we have a tendency to think, well, why would I want other people suffering? I don't want other people suffering. It's just going to make me feel bad, right? And I don't want to feel bad, right? I want happiness. I don't want suffering. So I just saw a very interesting answer to this question, was their suffering is so much more to them than me knowing they're suffering, right? Like when someone tries to be kind to us because we're in a bad place, we know that they can't possibly feel what we're feeling, right? We know that they can't possibly know how bad we're feeling in that moment, because it's not their problem. It's not their difficulty. It's not their suffering. And so recognizing that even if I feel empathy for this other person, it's never going to be as bad as they are feeling. So that was interesting, I thought, for me. Okay, so not othering their suffering, but being present. We can remember when we were in the same situation, when we went through similar difficulties. We know what it feels like to feel bad. So that creates a connection to us. Othering someone separates us, and we're trying to bring connection here. And compassion is not only about feeling their suffering, it's also about wishing to remove it, to take it away. Okay, I don't want them to feel bad anymore. Okay, then what do we do with that? So what are we doing here? I'm willing to take that suffering on me, but it's not that subtle, conventional sense of self. Okay, that's not the me that I'm taking, that's taking on that suffering. I'm going to use that suffering to crush that self-centeredness, to crush that sense of a me that believes that it is separate from all others, that believes that it is beyond, or somehow more important than all others. Okay, that's what I am taking that suffering on. And we do it because we recognize that the source of everyone's suffering is that self-grasping and that self-centeredness. And so I'll take on that suffering and I say, okay, me feeling bad, taking on their suffering, I'm going to use that. I'm going to transform it. I'm going to make it into, I'm going to destroy, get rid of that self-grasping, which doesn't exist. I mean, that sense of that self doesn't exist anyway, and it creates problems for me. So I'm going to stop it. That's what I'm going to do. And then what happens is when I stop that, what is released, what is opened is my basic goodness, my loving kindness, my Buddha potential, my Buddha nature, my natural wish to be happy, which is loving, which is kind. That deep, lasting happiness that I want is the source of my enlightenment, is what I'm working toward, who I am becoming. And that I spread, I give. And that's the giving part. I expand that love. Okay. And they talk about doing it secretly because you don't want to make a big deal about it. And we do it on the breath. So you can do this anywhere. You can do this anytime. You don't have to sit in front of the computer and you don't have to sit on your cushion. You can do it while you're driving. You can do it while you're riding in the bus. You can do it while you're walking. You can do it while you're waiting in line to pay for your groceries or, whatever at the ATM or, you can do it anytime. And what does that do? It fills your mind with thinking, feeling, loving kindness and compassion. It takes away that me that we're usually so filled with. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Oh, I have one more quote to share. Lama Zopa. The Mahayana of great compassion is the wish to take responsibility for the welfare of all sentient beings. So this Tonglen, this whole, Lojong, then takes us to this point where it's my responsibility. I'm the one that needs to do something about it. I have this capacity. It's the only way for me to be happy. So therefore, this is what I need to do, taking responsibility. And what's the best way that I'm going to do that? I'm going to do that by becoming enlightened. Okay. So let's do some practice. So we'll do a meditation on Tonglen. And we'll start with someone easy, someone who is dear to you. So first get into your meditation posture. Allowing your shoulders to relax, taking some deep breaths. And imagine someone who is dear to you. Imagine that person is with you. Maybe they're sitting next to you. Maybe you're holding them in their lap, in your lap. It can be a pet. It can be anyone. And notice that sense of closeness, that sense of connection to this being, to this friend. Notice how you start to relax and feel open toward this person when you consider them being near you. And then think about some difficulty they may be having, or have had, or will have in the future. Some problem or suffering. It may be related to sickness or aging, maybe related to loss. And while keeping that sense of connectedness to that friend, feel with them. That pain. You know what disappointment, loss, frustration feels like. And then notice that when it's in someone you care about, it feels worse, bad. And then that want for that to stop emerges. You don't want them to feel that way anymore. And if you could, you would take away that suffering. And feel the strength of that determination. How courage comes up. I want to stop their suffering. I'm willing to do whatever needs to be done because I care about them and I don't want them to suffer. So then we can imagine that that's negative energy or pollution, stinky smoke. And we become willing to take that suffering on, to bring it to us, to remove it from them and put it on us. Why? To stop our own self-centeredness, the source of all misery. So as soon as I become willing to take that suffering on myself, I'm no longer self-centered. That ego is burst, removed. My compassion and my love become more powerful than that self-centeredness. And then my heart opens even more for that person. And all my wishes for them to be happy, I imagine, are fulfilled. I feel blissful because I am freed of the source of my negativity. And I share that bliss with others. And they start to develop it within themselves. That friend starts to free themselves from their own afflictions, starts to develop positive causes and experience positive results. The conditions come together for them to be happy. And then we dedicate that we can actualize this practice so that we can, in this life and in future lives, slowly, slowly get closer and closer to being able to actually remove the suffering, lead others to their bliss. Okay, so if there are questions, we can do some questions. Anthony is back. Stina, hello. Debbie. Isadora. Oh, my people from last year. Welcome back, everyone. Lakme, hello. Got your email? Okay, I'm ready.
Yes, Venerable, it's lovely to see you. I've missed you actually. And hello, everyone else. Since no one else is asking a question, I'm going to ask something I could have Googled instead. I'm familiar with Lojong through the slogans. How are the slogans related in terms of, I understand how they go into different verses, so to say, but do they come from different authors, different?
Yeah, they're all a part of the Lojong teachings. So the 8 verses is like the condensed form, and the slogans are a more elaborate form of the same kind of practice. Because my understanding of the slogans is that they're divided into, there's a bunch of them, and they're divided into different sections of ways that we work with our mind. But it's all about this using the suffering and the problems and the difficulties to challenge that self-centeredness. That's the, yeah. So are they a different author? I would have to look. So there's an amazing book on this that called Mind Training, which is, really thick. It was edited by Tupten Jinpa, and it has a bunch of different texts by different authors, all on this topic of Lojong. And the slogans are in what is called the 7-point mind training. And they're a part of that. And the 8 verses are just another text. Now, who are they? Yeah. Go ahead.
No, then I mixed it up because the 7 and the 8. Yeah, it's not. I said I know how they are related, but actually I didn't at all.
Yeah, a commentary on the 7-point mind training.
Would be really amazing if Tushita had a course on the Lojong.
Yeah. That's what they're in. The 7 points: preliminaries, training in the 2 minds, taking adverse conditions onto the path, practice, the measure of having trained the mind, commitments of mind training, and the precepts of mind training. Those are the 7 points that the slogans are divided into. And this text is a commentary on it. It was written by Sechilbu Chupi Geltsen. And he was a student. He was a little later than Atisha. He was 12th century, but still one of the early Kadampa masters. I'd have to look at my notes to remember who his teacher was, but his teacher, I believe, was one of Lama Atisha's disciples, direct disciples.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering, what happens if you've already reacted badly to the betrayal of someone that you felt that you helped really well because you didn't know to treat it as a lesson at the time? Do I have to wait for someone to betray me again, or in the future, have I missed it?
No, of course not. Yeah, no, you can remember what it felt like to be betrayed. You can recognize what you did that was incorrect. You can regret that, purify that, and you can be extra careful to not even do small, tiny betrayals of everyone. So you start working on your honesty and your, you know, your integrity and being honest and, you know, as transparent as possible. So you start doing it even in little ways to counteract that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So the book I was talking about is by Joan Halifax. It's called Standing at the Edge. That was when I was talking about compassion being an edge state. She also talks about altruism and pathological altruism, which I think is amazing concept. This idea that we have to balance, you know, we can't give so much that we can't give anymore, because then we can't give anymore. Okay. Yes. Next question. Go ahead, Anil.
Good evening, Venerable. Hello, everyone. Venerable, the thing is, it was a phenomenal year, especially with you last year. There were a lot of things to learn. Lamrin, Lojong, even the Medicine Buddha retreat, which I remember very well. And, all these teachings come to mind when your mind is at ease. But when you're really stressed out, you have very high anxiety levels, all these things totally disappear. So, what would you advise, in such times of distress? How can one simplify meditation? Because I don't think so. I have that strong willpower like you or like His Holiness to actually ride through every wave or breeze or storm. And these things just totally vanish after a period of time, and they come back when the times are normal. There's calm around me or in my mind. I get your teachings back then very swiftly.
Yeah.
But when things are not right, I just don't recall your teachings for that matter. Everything goes haywire and it's like back to zero. I think so. I need to start again that first course with your initial course, that 10-day course, Introduction to Buddhism again.
Yeah. You know, it is about repeating things. It's like you said, it's about familiarity, getting, hearing them over and over and over again. And during times of ease. And then even when you're stressed, they come up. You start to remember them because they become a part of your, your habitual way of thinking. That's my first, is that it's not that they disappear completely. The more that you hear them, the more influence they have, even during difficult times. And then returning to the breath, always that going internal, stepping, because there's a trust that even during really difficult times, you're develop, your Buddha potential, your wish to, to your interconnectedness, your, that part of you that is wise is always present, even if you can't hear it and you can't feel it. And the breath is like a way to get in touch with that, to come back to that. And so I think, just breathe. Huge.
Right, Venerable. Thank you. Venerable, just bear with me. Just two small questions. When I was going through your 6th verse, and I tried to relate it to all the Buddhist teachings and books and autobiographies which I have gone through, be it Pema Chodron or His Holiness books. So when I read about His Holiness, he was the incarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama. He was found in the Namdo region. So if you see the 6th verse which you taught us today, he had very good karma. He came from the 13th Dalai Lama to the 14th Dalai Lama. But then you see, karma had it like he had to leave the Potala Palace, the noble Inca, come down to India. So what would you attribute to that to? Means he's got the best karma. He's got 13 Dalai Lamas before him. He's been reincarnating again and again with the best karmas, which none of us, I don't think so, we can ever have in our lifetime or in eons also if we go forward with meditation.
Yeah. Well, His Holiness is a little bit different story than like an ordinary being, because you can't really judge and say that it was negative karma for him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One way you can look at it is that it was something that that happened so that Buddhism could spread around the world, and so that he could reach many, many more people. So you can look at it as it was so negative he had to leave, right? Or you could look at it as this was how he manifested to benefit all many, many more beings. So it's, and we can't, of course we can't know. And if he's an enlightened being, it's only for our benefit. It would not be suffering for him at all.
No, I don't mean any suffering for him. I said, so you mean to say there's a bigger story behind even misfortune? That's what you're trying to say, if I'm correct?
Yes.
Like that is the reason Tushita, Mahayana spread, and we got to know more about what happened in Tibet and how this holy scriptures, Nagarjuna. So it was like an awakening for the world and people all around the globe to actually experience Dalai Lama and his disciples, how to actually go through our life. And in case we can't, take Buddhism for ourselves, but at least we can try to act or be good Buddhists because of the values which Dalai Lama says, like, he's preaching human values, not Buddhism per se, for that matter.
Yes.
So,
Definitely.
Venerable, when do you think, like, we people, unlike His Holiness, we have a lot of, I mean, he also has responsibilities, but, we are stuck in, like, okay, we have a family, we have children to take care of, wife. And at times, we feel that, yes, when I listen to you and I'm so inspired by you, that's the reason, like, I scroll down, on Tushita and try to see where you are, and I come back to you, actually listening to what you have to say. It's very important to me. And there are times when I don't know, like, I've got responsibilities and uh, total detachment, moving away. So that's something, when do you think a person should do that? When do his responsibilities end? Like when his children are married or when they are like started earning, and so he can actually take up what he likes most, like me listening to your courses and listening to the Buddha, the Dharma and Sangha, things like that.
Mhm. I think it's a process. It's not like one day you decide now you're going to change your life and do something completely different. I think it's a slowly moving to making Dharma more and more the focus of your life. And what happens when you do that? So you don't reject your responsibilities. You don't give up your responsibilities. You just have a vision that slowly you're going to do more retreat, you're going to do more practice, you're going to study more, and that when then the small choices that you make become about moving in that direction, so that as your children grow up and they move out, then instead of taking on more responsibilities like expanding your business or something, you instead say, okay, I'm gonna, instead of doing that, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna go and do this retreat. Instead of going on this vacation, I'm gonna go and do this. Or instead of spending my extra time going out to movies or something, I'm gonna spend it with Dharma. And so I feel like that slowly, that as your responsibilities finish, then you just start making choices to take on Dharma responsibilities instead of secular ones, worldly ones.
Right, Venerable. Thank you so much for listening me out.
Yeah. I have one in the chat. Do you have any in the chat, Kumpenla?
I'm sorry. We had Isadora, but then we lost her again.
Oh, should I?
Did she lose courage? I think it's from Isadora.
Yeah.
No, Kumpenla, Isidora is here. She would like you to read the question.
Okay.
Oh, okay, because she had her hand up. But
Okay.
Venerable, you see her? You see the question yourself?
Oh,
Yes.
No.
I have the question. All right. I am starting to develop empathy for the most evil and irritating beings, understanding their actions come from delusions and also from the fact that my mind plays a role in the way I see them that stems from my delusions. However, I still have a strong aversion to their actions. For instance, greed, participation in wars. How can this be reconciled? How can I develop equanimity in extreme situations? And how can this be balanced with wise, non-self-grasping actions? When to act and when not to, unless one is enlightened. Okay, so the first part of it is having strong aversion to their actions. I think, well, first of all, if you're already separating their actions from the person, that's the first step. Because we can care about someone and not condone their actions. And I would actually reframe aversion to their actions to compassion for the suffering that the actions are causing. So instead of being, angry about it, we feel this strong, I want it to stop. I want it to end. I don't want this to happen again. And that it can be just as strong as aversion. It can be just as powerful, but it motivates us. It instead of being just, hatred and frustration and I can't take it anymore, overwhelm, it becomes, how do I use it? What is this, where's my determination? Geshe Kelsang Wangmo said, anytime we feel we have compassion, we recognize suffering, it should be this strong, like, I am going to do the next thing I need to do to get enlightened as quickly as possible to benefit sentient beings. I'm going to do whatever I can. We turn it into that taking responsibility. Developing equanimity in extreme situations. The best equanimity quote from Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva is, and it's also the Serenity Prayer for AA. It's, if you can change something, then do it. Why worry about it? Doesn't help to have strong emotions about something. If you can do something about it, you just do it. If you can't do anything about it, if you have to accept it, then why worry about it? There's nothing you can do about it. So it's like letting go of that strong emotion by either doing what you need to do or letting go of it, because you can't do anything about it. That's so hard, that acceptance, that because that it brings along this sense of helplessness. But even that is that manifestation of that ego mind, that self-centered mind that thinks I'm all powerful, I can do everything, I'm separate, instead of recognizing we're all an arising, we're a dependent arising of all these causes and conditions. And then within that, we can have effects, right? We can have little movements, but we certainly can't change the whole thing at once because we don't exist that way. So that helplessness is often a part of that self-centeredness, that self-grasping. Okay, how can this be balanced with wise, non-self-grasping actions? When to act and when not to, unless one is enlightened. So of course, until you're enlightened, we still are going to have that ignorance that is that self-centeredness. We're going to have it. So then we coming back to Anil's question, centering, right? Coming back to the breath, using our discrimination, our wisdom, and trying to find answers. And if you can't do it in the moment, Shantideva says, be like a block of wood. You watch your body, you watch your speech, and when you're alone, you work with your mind. Okay.
Hi, Venerable.
Hi.
So just building off the other questions, when thoughts arise in the mind, I perceive them obviously immediately the image either pulls me towards the image or the whatever the sense, or I kind of push it away. But sometimes there's a state of, okay, I'm just, it's that neutral state, right? Which I haven't had a lot of teaching on that, this neutral state and how it differs from, say, acceptance or equanimity. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So there's a practice, it's within shamatha, that shine, calm abiding practice, that calls settling the mind in its natural state. That's what it's called. And you can find these teachings, Alan Wallace teaches on it. And it is that sort of neutral that you're talking about state where you don't react, you learn to, or your reactions become really, really subtle. So that when you recognize as soon as this, thought or, you contact something, then instead of moving toward it or away from it, you simply let it be. Okay. Now that is equanimity, that is acceptance. But then when we start talking actions, when you've separated, when you've created a little distance from your reaction to those things, then you have choice. Okay. Then you can choose, okay, maybe I'm not going to go for this. Maybe I'm not going to, react strongly to this, but maybe this would be most beneficial. This would be how I would, manifest love and compassion in my world. So that would be the next step. First, you have the equanimity, the acceptance, and then you have the discrimination of how to act.
I was asking because, it makes a lot of sense what you said. But I've also, I think Venerable Robina in a teaching last year, she said that neutrality is not a state to be, she didn't go into it, but she said that it's not really a desirable state, neutrality. So I guess this is what she meant, like we have the power to act and from that stability move to act. Right. Yeah. Okay.
I think it's a necessary intermediate stage, but it isn't the final. No, you don't want it as your final goal.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
So I have a question from Vinod. Can I read it? Okay. If people close to us suffer more on hearing of the suffering that one is passing through, like mothers. So Vinod, are you here? Because I didn't get a question out of that.
Did Vinod Raja?
Yeah, yes.
He's here, yeah.
Vinod, did you want to elaborate? Because I just...
Yeah. I have a problem with my connection, Venerable. So I'm not, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
That's great, thank you. And nice to hear you and nice to see you, at least on my screen. Thank you. Yeah. No, I was just wondering, many times I just have this feeling that I go, when one is actually going through a very intense kind of moment or hardships for that matter. And one tries to share that others get to know of your hardships. Sometimes they suffer more than you, I keep feeling. So I sort of sometimes sometimes that prevail. I mean, sometimes it prevents me from sharing all that with make it known, to others or to share it sometimes. So I become very reluctant to say that I'm actually going through this one. I would rather say that after going through it, rather. Like there has been many instances like that. I just kept wondering, like, for example, people who are, what is happening around the world, so much so that, people who are not there people who are actually at the front facing the brunt facing all these, facing the crisis, maybe there's some kind of a strength that they have, whereas people who hear about it may not have that kind of a strength to bear it.
Yeah. So you're asking, should we then cut ourselves off from that suffering?
No. How much to share and let others know that what we are going through.
Yeah.
Well, take a relative call on it.
It always comes back to your motivation. What is the purpose of sharing that with others?
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So is it to connect, more with them? Is it to, somehow, that's what you would have to examine. Sometimes when we share, it's because we need the support of someone else.
Yeah.
Sometimes we share because we want them to feel sorry for us, or we feel like our lives are worse than theirs and they should know that, and then it's not. So what would be the motivation in sharing? That I think is what we have to examine. If it would,
I could just give you an example. I'm just wondering, there's lots of people who are stuck now in Ukraine, who are just absolutely stuck there. Many of the, especially the Indian students out there, and they are, trying to get out of that place. And I've met some people here who are suffering probably more than them here, possibly because they have to get out of the situation anyway, and hearing of it, there are people who are probably suffering much more than what they are undergoing there. I'm just to give you an example of, this could be with anybody, and then your heart also goes out to the kind of suffering that at least the people who are there, who have gone there out to study, are coming back, going to be possibly they have a hope of getting back here. Now, what is going to happen to the people there who are actually there again suffering there in Ukraine, and what is happening when you're getting bombed, and when you hear these stories of people who come back and tell us what's happening out there.
Yeah.
So, it tends to overwhelm us much more possibly than when the people have passed through and come here after passing through all that suffering. And joys afterwards of having come back here. Even carrying their pets, all of them who have come back have also carried their pets here.
Yeah.
So all of them, most of them. So I feel so happy that, they've not let go anything. I don't know what attachment is, but then, you don't leave your pets out there to, they brought them back here.
Yeah. Well, we can rejoice in the good fortune of
good fortune. Yes.
Yes, in their good fortune, we can rejoice. I don't think you can say anyone, well, I guess you can. But it doesn't, let's see, some people are suffering worse in the moment than other people. That's definitely true.
Yeah.
But everyone has suffering, and everyone's, so we wouldn't want to feel compassion for some and not for others just because of their degree of suffering.
True.
Wouldn't want to do that. But you can definitely rejoice in the good things that happen for people as well.
Thank you. Thank
Sure.
you so much.
I don't have any more.
Thank you so much, Venerable Drolma. Thank you so much for your practical, down-to-earth teachings. Very, very helpful, I think, for everybody. So we are looking forward to having you back for the last online introductory course. There are 2 dances because it's another introductory course online, and it's the last one, we hope. I think most of you must have joined that already. Our 2-part online course, which Venerable Drolma amazingly, I'm still amazed 2 years ago, how quickly we were still doing the last residential retreat, and she had already converted the 10-day residential course into a 1 month online course with all these slides and things like that. And nobody knew about Zoom yet. So we hope to finish that chapter after that introductory course. So we started after the Days of Miracles. If you know people who might be interested, please spread the word by your social media or by word of mouth. And then in May, we go back to residential. That's our big hope. Of course, we don't know the future, but that's what we're hoping for. So Venerable Drolma is working right now on a little schedule. And we're gonna offer introductory courses and intermediate courses again. Yeah, probably in turns, one intro, one intermediate, slowly we start again. So if you're interested, please, yes, let's all come or go to India. For the Indians, a little bit easier for the Westerners right now. India is still relatively closed, so we will see how things develop. There are 1 month visas available already, but yes, you have to be quick, to get in and out of the country again. But hopefully that will be opening up, like the rest of the world is slowly opening up again. Okay, thank you so much, Venerable Drolma.
Yep.
See you very soon again, everybody. Thank you
Okay.
so much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good evening in India. Good lunchtime in Europe and Americas. Have a good day. Bye-bye. And at 9 o'clock, we have Venerable Thupten Chodron again for another talk. Yeah, 9 o'clock Indian time. Venerable Thupten Chodron will talk about making every day a miracle. See you then again. Bye-bye.